Hey, how's it going?
Howdy.
Howdy back, y'all.
Ah, how you doing?
Could be better.
Not good, huh?
Yeah, no, it could be. I could be better. It's not just that. There's a lot of weird personal stuff, as well. I had to drop out of a bunch of my classes and shit.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
Like,
Just time constraints?
basically, I had to drop out of 75% of them. It's partially time constraints. I was, I feel I felt that I couldn't do the full workload considering how much work I'm doing outside of it, but I was kind of like pressured by others to like do it, and that it seemed to be I was right about it. And it's also like it's I don't know why I'm just in a state where I'm looking at the work and I can do it. I even like know the answers to the questions, but I just can't bring myself to like write the answers down. So yeah, I'm applying for retroactive withdrawals from like 75% of my classes. I'm gonna keep one because I want to get at least a class done this semester.
Well, when it comes to your, prospective career, I'd say you're well ahead of the standard track, so there's no reason to push yourself.
Yeah, I think I need to be a lot more like a lot better on my easier on myself when it comes to like my work and the amount of stuff I'm putting on myself because I feel that for for my age, I think I'm doing okay.
Yeah, I'd say so, maybe even remarkably so. So I don't have a tremendous amount of time. In your words then, what did you want to talk about?
So specifically, what I wanted to talk about was first mistakes that I felt that I made.
Mhm.
I think the biggest mistakes I made was number one, not giving context in the original tweet. Now the original tweet, I guess from in my perspective at the time, I thought since like everybody was talking about it, people would know the context when I made the tweet. Um, and then I did say in like the replies later that like okay, I'd be willing to like post the vods and stuff on here too, but it seemed that wasn't really received well, so I just kind of gave up on that and just kept going. I would think that was like one thing I think I did wrong. Um, Another thing I think I did wrong was like first reacting to this instead of the other thing. I guess like for me, like moving into the IRL shit was like a line that I thought was crossed. And so I
Uh-huh.
guess I just reacted to that very kind of like fervently. Um and I don't think that even if that is something I still stand by, that it's still obviously it's gonna look a certain way most certainly if that's the first thing I'm reacting to when even though I 100% disagree with what RGR said and I've made that clear since then. I think I should have made that more clear from the beginning because it made it look like I was giving more of it like a full-throated defense. And like ever since then, I guess I just wish I checked out and never engaged in the discourse to begin with because holy shit, I felt that it got super bad faith super quickly.
Well, I mean, it was definitely pretty heated. I don't know. I mean, with regards to whether or not it's bad faith, I guess that'd be a point by point kind of thing. In terms of what I saw, I mean, you clearly have a very strong reflex for defending your friends, which isn't the worst character trait to have, you know. But I think, I mean, I think you correctly identified some of the stuff that gave me pause, you know. Certainly, your first instinct, it seemed, was to engage in a kind of implicit defense. Not for everything RGR did, of course, but, against the attempts at contacting the organization you're both a part of, that sort of thing. And there's nothing inherently wrong with doing that, you know.
Mm.
If you had the point
You're
of
as far as I know, you're against that as well. It seemed though to be the case
it
from your stream.
it seems in addition to probably fruitless, not the best response, but I can sympathize with the people who feel that way, you know. I know, for example, that if you were to take away any preconceptions about RGR, and don't get me wrong, while I'm pretty disgusted with her at the moment, I know she's smart, and you know, I don't think she's some like secret malicious bigot or whatever. But if you were to take away that info and all we knew was like, hey, you know, we found this person online who's doing this, that, and the other. Oh, and it turns out they're part of a progressive org who doesn't know about this. Like, in an abstract sense, I don't know if I could really condemn people for feeling that the organization should at least be aware of it. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean you have to get on board with it, but the way it was like you were bragging almost, you know, like I'll use all my political power to
Let
defend her.
let me be clear, right? Um, that was like super like LARPy, and I don't like the LARPiness of it. But I will also say that if people just see that, right, and this is what I didn't like about that, is that they're thinking that like Dillian basically thinks there should be no consequences whatsoever, right? When in that stream itself, I laid out what I think would be 100% reasonable consequences for what
Right, right, right,
had
of course.
happened.
But
And so when I said that specifically, it was basically me like talking about. It was literally after like this. I think pretty, I guess, personal discussion about like two like trans people getting murdered in my community, and me seeing this org and the work Riley did. When we basically had no LGBTQ plus infrastructure in our county, and it being really aspiring to me, and how I think like going for somebody's job in this context before they've even been able to like have a period of reflection or release a statement after everything, I think is not reasonable. Definitely when I think they do so much
no,
good IRL
and
work, and so
I
that's
think
that's
you can
why I was
hold.
so I was so fucking reflexive.
Well, yeah, well, I think you can hold that position. I think if you would come out and said, you know, uh, on stream, not on Twitter, because
Hmm?
Twitter's bad, you know, if you'd been
Oh
like,
yeah,
listen, you know,
I'm never I've today I've decided I'm finally gonna use the block button. Up to this point, I barely ever used it, and I finally tapped.
well, it's the discourse in general, but I think that if you'd come out and you'd been like, listen, you know, I want to acknowledge first and foremost that I have a conflict of interest in this, because other people pointed out the conflict of
Now
interest
that
before you.
I don't
Uh,
now that, oof, okay, when you say conflict of interest, do you mean the
Occurred is
org
occurred.
specifically?
Right. Well, when you brought it up, at least it seems like the weight with which you brought it up, it was mostly about like, oh, well, see, this is how I know she's good, and this is how I can use my position to defend her. Not so much because you know that only makes it seem from at least from your perspective like you have a tremendous bias. If other people are looking at this and they're not feeling as hot about your motivations going into it, then it feels like you're essentially bragging about the privileges that a conflict of interest gives you.
I would say that it can seem that way. But I feel that maybe if somebody, and of course nobody ever does, but if you watch the broader conversation and the lead up to it, it wasn't really, I guess, bragging. I guess at a certain point, I was I guess at the end when I was like, oh yeah, the Twitter account versus person on the board, but it came from like, I guess I was also very very angry. But I also think that it isn't an unreasonable. Number one, it was a lot of this was already public information. I already said it like previously, like a week ago, how me and Riley were on like the same board, stuff like that. It was not like I was hiding this information up until now. And I'd also say that I think I need to be in the same org or be working with said person to know they do good work, right? So it shouldn't be surprising if I'm talking about somebody's good work, you're gonna find out that I've worked with them and I do stuff with them, right? Like I
Right,
don't think that's like, and people can say that's a conflict of interest, but then I would also say that someone could easily say, if I, let's say I was on the completely other side, like Dylan, you're friends with Demonmama. I mean, she got you like the MJF thing right after you got out of the mental ward. This is obvious. You're just saying this because of conflict. Like you could have said that either which way, and I think
you could, but I think it's categorically different when it's an actual organization rather than just a friendship, you know. It's about the way it's invoked. I'm not saying there's anything necessarily wrong with the opening set of circumstances. It's the way in which it was brought up, you know. If anything, I think, especially if you're trying to win over, convince, or placate people who you feel would be upset with the position you're going to hold, you would want to sort of acknowledge the conflict of interest in a way that doesn't come off like, at least when I saw you talk about it, and I saw the whole thing. I've seen the streams, I'm caught up, I'm playing
Um,
Diablo. I follow the drama. The perspective I got from you as a person who does really not have a beat with you was that it was you just had a bias towards Riley, and that the material circumstances of the situation were largely irrelevant because you trusted her and you were in proximity to her, and that's really sort of that was the driving force for you. Now, I'm not saying that's true. I'm only saying that from the
okay,
language you
okay.
used.
So can I say that I can understand how it can come off that way? Because when I talked about it, a lot of it had to be centered on like I trust Riley because I've seen probably more of Riley than basically anyone else on the platform because I've had that ability to work there, right? And so if I have had that personal ability to work with somebody and see them do phenomenal work and in many instances better work than I've ever been able to even touch the coattails of, uh, there's going to be a certain perspective that I have that's going to be different than the perspective everybody else engaging in the discourse is, and I think that could make it look like I'm extremely biased towards one person, or you could even call that bias.
Of course, which is why it's important to frame that properly. To make it to indicate that the conflict of interest is something that you're acknowledging and taking into account, not just something that it seems like other people are pointing out in response to your perceived proximity. There was it's a lot of stuff like that, really, not just the position, but blocking. I know people got on you for blocking
I
Gayfesh on
stand by that
Twitter.
100% though, because the thing is, people are not okay. I've
I mean,
I've I've posted
in
the
that
context of that a
tweet,
million times.
Gayfesh only added the context to what it was you were saying Riley had a bad take on.
So if you, I've shown the context to the other tweet that was sent that I saw before that tweet, and I just both of them compounded, and I was just like, okay, no, fuck off, and I blocked them because there was a bunch of other people in that thread who said basically the same thing, and I didn't block them, right? So the reason why I blocked them specifically is because they made like this other tweet, which really like pissed me off that like declared Riley the enemy, right? And I don't really like
Do you have an
tweets.
issue with that?
Yes, I have a massive issue with that.
Can you understand why Gayfesh might use that language?
I understand it, and I still wholeheartedly disagree with it.
Why?
Because the declaration of them being the enemy not only comes off as heavily fanatical, but that type of language, I think, normalizes a certain type of behavior towards them that is reprehensible.
How so?
When you declare somebody the enemy, right? When I think of the type of people that you would declare the enemy, I'm thinking like literally the worst people on the planet. I'm thinking like organizations of the worst type and people of the worst type. Type
Do you
of
think everyone uses it that way though? When I think of like like when I read that tweet for the first time, without any of the surrounding context, I think I read it in its intended form, which was that RGR's political positions contribute to reactionary tendencies that segment or hurt
what
elements of the queer community. Not like
well
not
then
like to
that and
clarify
the
why,
thing is
because I saw the
that's
Hamas
still wrong
commentary in it.
though. The thing is that's still wrong though because if you look at Riley's if you look at the totality of Riley's activism, to say that they are the enemy of queer people would also be wrong, because when you look at their actual contributions, what have she been the biggest warrior on? Ending the trans panic defense. Not
So wait,
only
hold on.
wait,
So wait,
okay.
that didn't say an enemy to all queer people. And I don't think you can fairly accuse Gayfesh of hyperbole when your response was to say that Gayfesh sounded like a member of Hamas. I mean, clearly the hyperbole was a bit reciprocal there.
Well, yeah,
When we're
I reciprocated in a hyperbole. I never know how to say it. Hyperbole. There it is. Hyperbole. I reciprocated in hyperbole, and I have said since then that I think probably Hamas wasn't the. I shouldn't have played Hamas music, but I should have.
you
I should
really
have just
leaned
wait.
into that too. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah, because
it was a whole
Because
bit.
it really pissed me off. But I do think I should have just used normal military marching music because it still was heavily fanatical, and I don't think that post should have been made.
It's Twitter. The language is a little bit severe, I admit, but the underlying logic there, I think, is pretty sound. Now, this isn't about
I
defending I don't care if you block or unblock, but the idea, like, RGR's behavior is sufficient for people to think that she might not be worthy of being a civil rights advocate, at least in this respect. I
That
don't
wasn't even the
find that.
tweet though. That was even the thing is it's not only I don't think they're worthy of being a civil rights active advocate. It's they are the enemy. That's even
Oh,
that's further than that.
I'm acknowledging the hyperbole in that statement, which I think we can agree was mutual. But I think, and I'm fairly sure that if I asked them, they would affirm this, that the underlying meaning to that statement, which I think we should be at least a little bit respectful towards, because otherwise, anytime you saw, like, if a person said J.K. Rowling is the enemy, you wouldn't be like, oh, she's a foreign adversary then. What is she, a Nazi? Like, no, no, okay, let's try to be at least a little bit charitable. And in this case, I think that the general statement is that RGR's behavior was severe enough that there are issues with having her, be an advocate for queer liberation. That there are blind
Now,
spots in her ideology that
in
would make it destructive potentially.
on the blocking thing, can I also bring up that Gayfish has specifically even admitted that they've been hostile towards me for months, right? And so this
No,
was a breaking point for me. I just wanna say that first. And the second thing is
sure.
I acknowledge that you could find an extremely good faith interpretation of this that would be like, well, specifically they're saying that their rhetoric on this recent issues would be something that's harmful towards trans people. But even in the most good faith interpretation, the declaration of the enemy, considering Riley has also done really, really, really good work for the trans community, I don't think is warranted. And if this is somebody who is using extremely hyperbolic statements and being extremely fanatical with those statements, me with the main criticism of that was this is something that sounds super fanatical. This is something that is going super super duper hard, and it was me also in a way mocking it for LARPing. Right. That's why
Right.
I said it
Okay.
specifically in that way. And
So
so
I'll
my let
wait.
me can
If I may, because
okay.
I don't have that much time. I just, and I think I know what you're about to say. Let me just move past this. I genuinely don't care. I think that you
Okay.
were fairly performative in the way that you responded to this by hyperfixating on a very limited element of the criticism that RGR was getting. By far, the vast majority of the denunciation wasn't that one tweet everyone focused on. Now, there's nothing wrong with acknowledging that tweet, but your responses were also leaning heavily towards hyperbole. And for us to fixate on, like, well, this interpretation over that, I want to talk about the idea that RGR's behavior might be unbecoming of advocating. And I've said this like 3 times now, but every time you sort of run past it with the, well, she's done a lot of good. But you could say that about a lot of people who ended up being bad for the queer community. TERFs, for example, have been a part of feminist advocacy for decades. But obviously, now that trans rights are a sort of prominent issue, we recognize that allowing them the leeway that they were given for so long ended up being destructive. Now, I'm not saying RGR is a TERF. She's just definitively not. But that's an indication that it's possible for a person to be, you know, politically valuable in a majority
Now
of senses, but in a minority be destructive to a
I
queer
I
member of the
agree
community.
that the rhetoric is unbecoming of an activist. I would agree with that. Now,
Hmm.
I would say that saying that somebody should lose their ability to do any and all activism, including the positions they worked very hard for up to this point, before a public statement has been released, with also excluding all of the positive they've done, is not, I think, productive and is extremely, I would say, I think not. I would say is unproductive would be the nicest way to put it. And so that would be my counter is that they haven't
Okay.
even been able to give it the time to reflect. They haven't released if we even know there's going to be an apology. I've talked to them in private and told them exactly what I had problems with what they said. And that's probably my biggest issue is
Well,
everybody
this has been happening for months, hasn't it?
um you mean the specific like the arc around all of this? Yeah, it
Right. I mean, the
has.
initial position, I mean, I think RGR has demonstrated that this blind spot she's had has been around for a while. It wasn't some one-off thing. She clearly cared enough about it to
Which is why I
start
think
beef
they
in the
need time to
past.
reflection. Exactly.
Wouldn't that have been okay? So you can say she might reflect after this, and if she does, I think that's wonderful. I don't intend on holding beefs if she accounts for her behavior and apologizes and stuff. The only reason I guess I'm bothered is because it feels like um, the main criticism that you got was that it felt like you were understating the severity of Riley's bad take. by calling it a bad take, by not detailing it, sort of focusing on
Yeah, which I've
the
already agreed that I should have given more context. Yeah.
right. Well, so if it's clearly there are people who think it's bad enough that it might make her unworthy of at least some kinds of civil rights advocacy. But you're not sympathetic to that perspective.
Um, no, but I would also say I think that comes from a point where I have more information, and I've tried to express that more information, but I don't think anybody was receptive to that more information. In fact, it was like laughed out of the room, basically.
Well, the way in which you presented it was pretty bad optically, right? It was like, well, I mean, saying like, "Don't worry, guys, I know her in person. She's better than this," is kind of the thing everyone says when a friend has been called out for bad behavior. Like, no matter what, that's like the default response that people throw out there. I think that if you had said like, I acknowledge my conflict of interest in this. I know that what she's done here is severe. That being said, I can't get on board with this, that, or the other because these attacks at her job, her position, because my experience with her has been largely positive. It seems like that would have conveyed maybe a more balanced.
Oh yeah, I'm not saying that I don't agree that there was better ways that I could have gone about presenting this information at the start. But I still believe that people declaring them the enemy, like because if I say that, right, my position fundamentally doesn't change basically at all, and the people who disagree with that position fundamentally we still have the same thing, so I'd still have the same criticisms for, it, right?
Sure. So, with regards to the criticisms then that some of the people have for RGR, the more severe ones, I still don't think there's really much value in going after the job or bar association or whatever, or the
So you do
position.
agree with me on that, right?
Yeah, I've said that.
Okay.
I'm not like super hung up on it because again, like if it turned out that there was like a feminist org where a person had been on for a while, it turns out they were like a turf or something. Like I
Yeah,
can, like, and people are like, oh,
but
well,
you
she
also
does good
need to
work.
understand that this is my state. So this would be affecting the activism abilities in my state and specifically in the organizations that I communicate and work in. And not to
Right.
mention the specific activism towards ending the trans panic defense in Maryland, which she has been an amazing warrior on and stuff like that. So that's why I think you're not as attached to it as I would be.
Well, yeah, of course. Also, you two are closer and you're on the same board. Now, if you just asked me my perspective, if it turns out somebody was like a turf, but they've been doing like the feminist board thing, and they'd contributed positively for a long time, that's also something I would be somewhat ambivalent to, at least. And I think it's a little bit comparable. My impression from RGR in that conversation was essentially that she was opposed to degeneracy. She would never use that term, of course, but if you broke down the argument she made and you found out what she was inconsistent on, she
Mm,
was. Well, wait,
okay.
hold on. And she was very inconsistent at some points where, for instance, she couldn't own up to it being pedophilic to make out in public, but but the foot fetish thing would be, and it's like, well, what's the difference? She could never really own up. It just seems like she
Well,
has a very strong emotional aversion to kink, and I'm guessing to non-normative sexuality, which is a disgust response. It stems
if
from the same
if
place transphobia does.
if that is the case, and there's still like one other thing I want, like at least one or two more things I want to cover, so I don't want to like spend too much time hooked up into this. If that was the case, then why was it specifically in the presence of children that the argument was being made, right, about these things? Because I agree that it was a terrible argument, and I don't agree with her position at all. But to say that it was just a rejection of quote unquote degeneracy, when I think the primary factor was the like presence of children, um, around this, when I don't think if I was to ask RGR like are you against all kinkovettes in public and period, even if there's like a restricted like no children allowed in here, I don't think she would say yes.
Well, Dylan, that's what every moral Puritan says. People who are homophobic will always go to the "what about the children" argument. Same with transphobes. They've done this. That's been the case for decades. You have people who are holistically opposed to sexuality, holistically opposed to kink, but obviously if they want to evoke the greatest moral response, you bring up the "in front of children" thing. Now, if I asked Riley, um, are you morally opposed to kink? I'm sure she would say no, and I'm sure she would believe the answer is no. But if you're invoking "what about the children" in some esoteric and frankly insane attempt to stigmatize fairly normal and accepted human behavior that doesn't align with sort of normality, I think it's a Puritan argument, and fundamentally it comes from the
But
same
wasn't it
disgust
mainly
response.
centered in consent in children?
The this is
Not
again
at the
how they've talked about. Yeah, why
well,
shouldn't
wait, well,
men
you
be
say
doing this in
you say
public?
how they talked about. Like, are you like, what do you mean by they?
Historically, arguments from homophobes and transphobes have used the presence of children and the perception that there's a higher bar for consent needed for non-normative behavior. That's how they make their arguments. Now, obviously, these are irrational arguments. So, in order to invoke the greatest likelihood of convincing, the audience, you have to use heavily weighted moral language. We've seen this with transphobes for the past decade or so, where rather than deal with the abstractions related to transness, instead they always go to the what if there was a little girl in the bathroom, or they always go to that. So Riley went to that, and she used it to disingenuously attack people for, I mean, being barefoot in public. I mean, this is, I think this is a consequence of an attempt to kind of sort of logic bro your way into rationalizing a strong disgust response, which is, this is a dangerous precedent for the queer community. If you're using a sort of facsimile of scientific or ethical rejection to mask your disgust for non-normative behavior, that is like historically the biggest thing that people have invoked against queer people. I I sympathize with people's concern. I'll say that much.
Um, I I guess I need more time to think about that. Um, because I think I just need to process my thoughts on that, or maybe I'm just not understanding something that isn't being communicated. So I'll reflect on that.
No,
Um,
well, it's again,
well,
I'm not saying,
like,
I don't think that she's malicious or anything like that. We all have disgust responses. Lord knows I hate foot fetishes, but we respond to them in different ways. And I think when you see, I mean, if your aversion to these things is leading you to the take that going barefoot in public around a person with a foot fetish is tantamount to enabling pedophilia, you have to have jumped through some wild hoops to get to this point. I mean, clearly the logic train that you're on is has taken you through some very deep tunnels. You know what I mean?
yeah. Let me again. I said I don't know exactly how I feel about. I just don't know. I just need to reflect on it. I just don't know exactly what to think about it. So the one thing I want to ask is that, okay? So what do you? This is something that I probably pissed me off more than anything, right? So
Mhm.
if a lot of this conversation was about like caring about victims of CSA and not discrediting their personal experiences, making sure that we treat them with respect, right? That was a decent part of this conversation. And I feel that getting compared to the people, let me be specific, who protected Harvey Weinstein when I am, and this is public knowledge, am also a victim of childhood sexual assault, but that's putting it lightly, a rape as a child, where I was orally raped at school at the age of 5, and being compared to that is extremely hurtful.
Yeah, well, um, I guess cutting through whatever hurt there is, it's obviously also a hyperbolic statement, to say the very least. I think you were compared to being a friend of Epstein. The idea,
Yeah,
not Epstein, Jesus
those who
Christ. No, wait, not
not
Epstein,
Epstein,
sorry.
no.
Right, Weinstein, Stein's,
Weinstein, yeah. One of the
right.
most notorious rapists in like popular American culture.
Right. Well, I think, I mean, obviously, I don't think we're comparing severity of harm there. I doubt, I know Demonmama said that. I doubt Demonmama would, I think Demonmama even said obviously not as bad as Weinstein. But I think the comparison made is the idea like, oh, you're friends with this person, let's play defense with them. It's just an extension of the, the conflict of interest argument. I think what Demonmama is concerned with, and the reason why she used that language and other stuff is, I entertain a scenario, right? So RGR is intelligent and career-minded. I have no doubt that she'll go far. Okay, as have many people with, I think, biases in one way or another. And say, 10 years past 20, the progressive discourse advances somewhat, and suddenly what was once esoteric, queer-only infighty arguments suddenly becomes something with mainstream attention. Now, you'd have to trust then, would RGR's biases now translate into systemic harm in the future? What I'm talking about isn't a hypothetical. This happened with trans people. The trans people weren't public discourse 20, 30, 40 years ago. They were a joke to be made fun of. Same with, a lot of other marginalized groups today. Um, and they were, often thrown under the bus by the rest of the
Hmm.
queer community. So what mattered less then, at least proportionally, now it's quite significant. And I think they're just concerned that RGR could play that same favor. Maybe in 10, 20 years, RGR is contributing to advocacy in ways which marginalizes non-normative sexual or gender behavior. And I think that's something to be concerned with. That doesn't make you a friend of Weinstein. I'm only saying that
Well, but
in
to
the
be specific, a
context of that
protector of
potential
Weinstein,
harm.
because the
Right,
argument
right,
was that there were friends who were protecting Weinstein, right?
right. Well, I think
So
that's what she's
protecting the
afraid
rapist.
you could be protecting. She's afraid you could be protecting that through your proximity. Again, it's obviously
Which
hyperbole.
I
I mean,
feel like, considering, like, I understand that is the extension of that argument. I just feel that, considering that a huge part of this conversation was we need to be um soft, I guess you could say, or at least like considerate of the personal experience of childhood sexual assault victims. As somebody who was raped as a child, I feel like this was literally the worst possible comparison you could have made in the world. That was really hurtful.
oh, sure. Well, my argument has never been about softness with regards to CSA. I just think the logic employed by RGR was terrible. Demon Mama has, though. So, with regards to Demon Mama, I think you could be rightfully mad at her for using that language. I wouldn't. I think you could be. I think you'd be consistent in
Okay.
being angry with her for that.
One
Um,
last one, because I know you have to
right.
go.
But I just want to say, by the
Yeah.
way, yeah, my goal here isn't. I just think I worry that we're focusing on the wrong thing, we being the sort of collective discourse and not you specifically. I really don't take great issue with what you've done here. You reflexively defended a friend. Maybe the way in which you defended it optically or whatever, the framing could be better. But at the end of the day, I don't think you're some like tyrannical advocate for, defending people with horrible bigoted views. It's
Yeah.
just it's a really difficult situation. I don't envy the position you're in.
Okay. One last big like thing. Unless you have any comments after, you can make them. So in and this was something that really got to me too. There's a clip going around, and the clip is, you'll hear me be like, I think 90% of the problems on Twitch are caused by people um not acting normal. And then there's a spiel that Demonmama gives where it's like, that's really interesting. And eventually says, this is Dylan in a nice way calling me and Doe the F slur. And she actually says the word, and yeah. But
A Sigma move, of course.
the problem is, if you watch the entirety of the clip, that's me reacting to Irrelevant, another Twitch streamer that I know you and him are best friends, um, actually comparing neopronouns to the N word. And I'm reacting to that saying, holy shit, 90% of da 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 da. And it's very clear to me. And it seemed to be like very clear to everybody I've shown the clip to. And so it makes it hard for me to watch that and not think that there was bad faith there, and to basically say Dylan's being homophobic here when I'm literally just saying N-word bad.
Yeah. Wait, you think the N word is bad?
Yes.
Mm. I think, yeah. So there are degrees of bad faith here, I guess. In terms of the specifics there, so I'm not going to play defense for Demon Mama because I think the context of the clip was evident enough. Demon Mama was clearly super fired up during that stream and was like looking for any just collection of lines that she could attack you on.
This
So
is this
I
is
mean,
the same reason at the time that I stated I'm gonna try to say nothing about this. I'm gonna try to back away from, because I felt that it's gotten to the point where nobody's looking at each other in good faith, and that's why I wanted to back away. But then the thread was made, and then I just was like, okay, whatever.
right, right, right. Well, we're in deep now. We're in deep now. I think uh with regards to how like with regards to that clip specifically, or like, generally, I don't think you were calling Demon Mama the F slur or anything like that. I think the greatest criticism that could be levied at you, not from that clip specifically, but generally, is that you might underestimate the potential harm behind RGR's uh distaste for non-normativity, which I think that's valid. I think maybe you might be, but that's not the same as inferring that from that clip. I think the issue with stuff like this is I feel like so much of this shit needs to be settled in discussions off, or fuck it, on stream. I don't care. It's always like, here's
Yeah.
a
To be
stream where
clear,
I'm
I
reviewing
first
this, that.
we were gonna talk off stream. That was actually what I wanted to do originally.
um did that not work out?
Well, you were busy, so we're doing it on stream, so it's
Oh, you
fine.
meant with
It's
me.
fine.
Oh, I thought you meant with Demon. Sorry, sorry. Yeah, I was running errands, and I have some more to do as well. No, I think this is fine. Look, I really I'm really ambivalent to drama. I don't really care if the other people in this space hate each other, and I don't care if they get along either, because I'm kind of, I don't know, ambivalent with all the shit that I've gone through. But in this case in particular, I think that this is really, really, really unnecessary. Um, Especially now that everything's so loaded that even if you and like Demonmama had like some direct convo on stream, I don't know if there'd even be a way to have like a super calm breakdown of whatever issues you mutually have or
I
something like
just
that, right?
deleted
I mean, how
everything.
could you
I
do that?
deleted everything off of Twitter because I just don't want to do it anymore, and I'm just not in a good mental state, so I don't think it's good to engage on that on discourse. And I basically just said, look, I deleted everything, please, and it doesn't seem that it's gonna be as much of a coming together as I wish it could be, but because it felt I don't know yeah.
Okay, well can I ask two things personally?
A curd is a curd.
I'm sorry, I'm taken.
Okay, one thing then. Um, with regards to the potential harm done with RGR. By the way, I just want to make something clear, okay? With RGR, and I said this. I don't know if I said this on stream or if I tweeted this or something, but if RGR um took some time to chill, came back, apologized to Doe, which I think is very needed, and then explained the fault in her logic and moved on, I would be fine. I would have her on. I wouldn't speak ill of her. I think that's an important part of the process. Until I admit that I doubt that'll happen, but until that happens, I think it's warranted to um, I don't know, take seriously the potential harm here. It's more of like an underlying philosophical issue with non-normativity, I think. That can be really, really destructive. It's not just so obviously Doe is like, double gay.
Yeah.
But it's a broader, like the big difference, I think, critically between I don't get some of these esoteric identities, and I will invoke harm against children as an attack against these presentational elements that I'm not personally comfortable with. It's just so out there.
Um Yeah, I do agree with you. I mean, I have the thing is, one of the things that I was asked by Demonmama, and I did do, is that I talked to RGR privately about stuff and exactly my disagreement, and I've made them all very clear in private and exactly what I think she should do. I mean, I'm talking like a few hours, right?
Uh-huh.
So I do believe there should be apologies issued. If you would ask me the specifics of the apology, I couldn't say exactly. I guess it's one of those things where you'll know it when you see it, kind of thing. Like I couldn't, like, I don't know how. I've done apology streams before. There's never like the perfect way to do an apology, but I guess you know it when you see it, and I don't know exactly how to say that. But
Yeah, it's
I would
it's an art, not a science.
yeah, it's that you need to have like a crying thumbnail and like big text like I messed up, or you should, or the easiest is just to be looking down. If you just look down, then nobody can see your facial expression and say you're not being sad enough. Um, but I yeah, I guess for me it's just I'm also waiting, and I guess for me that was a big part of it. Like I feel that before we made like huge jumps to like going after people's stuff, like the least, even if you believe it's like okay, the least you could do is like wait for like to see this period of like, because you could say, well, this has been going on for 6 months to some degree. There's a lot of things that happened there that had not happened in the last 6 months. Like the stuff around CSA had not happened in the last 6 months. And of course, when something blows up in your face, it could take like a massive fucking event to like really make you
No,
reflect.
no,
Yeah.
of course, yeah, that's possible. I admit the cynicism here because it feels like RGR's reflex whenever she says something dumb is to say she's not being understood, which I think is a kind of a narcissistic trait. The idea
Well,
that it's well, with respect,
you
Lord knows
always
I'm
feel
not.
like that. You always feel like that when everybody's dogpiling on you, right?
Well, to an extent, but I think she does it so much, like all the time. It was before talking with Doe, after talking with Doe, while I was covering it, with me in chat, directly at me on call, then after call in DMs, then on Twitter before going private. It's like a very consistent, and she defaults to it too. Now, of course, we all feel that way to an extent, but I think it's concerning. Especially since like the first thing she did after ending call with me was say that my logic means I'd be okay with having sex in front of children, which is, I mean, I can either believe that she was dissociating and that was a product of some chemical fluctuations in the brain,
Wait,
or
to be clear, she
some
asked if
wild.
that was your position, right? Which is still bad.
Yeah.
And she also said she was tired. I hate to pull that, but I also just want to make that clear that was
Okay,
it.
okay. Then to be clear, she said, and I think this might be one of those distinctions without a difference. She said, "Am I wrong, or would Vaush's system allow for having sex in front of children? Maybe I'm
Yeah,
tired."
I understand.
Now,
I understand.
no,
I
right,
just
right,
want to
of
be
course.
precise.
Okay,
Yeah.
yeah. We'll take it from 100 to 95 on that one. And
Yeah.
I am frustrated by that because nothing in the convo even remotely
Yeah,
suggests that.
I 100% agree with you on that, though. I still 100% agree with you. And I one last thing, okay? Because I know it's been 40 minutes now, so it's
Yeah,
probably
I'm
over.
really not trying to dump on her. She is ultimately, optically, and in terms of probably, I imagine, emotional state, she's probably the big loser here. So, my goal here isn't to dump on her, and I like the hell out of you, and you know that. So, I don't want to dump on you or anything like that. These situations are difficult to navigate. I don't know if there was ever a world where this wouldn't have turned out kind of messily, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, I think obviously there's ways I could have like delivered my message in a more like way that would have like had less fallout, stuff like that. But I still think to some degree we would have seen some of this discourse still play out. I also should never do it on twitter.com again. I'll always make sure to do it in stream because then it's much harder to easily misinterpret because the people if I fuck up, people could just be like, "Dylan, what the fuck live?" And I could be like, "Oh, wait, let me correct this." Right? Which where with
Mhm.
Twitter it's a little more difficult because you could tweet something, turn off your phone, then wake up the next morning, be like, well, fuck.
No, no, no. I completely agree. Twitter is just bad for this sort of thing anyway. Stream lets you pepper in as much nuance as you want. So
This is maybe hate public life actually.
well, it's difficult to manage. I mean, of course, I'm set in the sense that like, um, if I ever stop streaming, that's it for me. I just become a fucking wanderer. Because I don't want future employers are going to Google my name and have to go through a fucking, the library of
What about
Babel.
IKEA?
Do they have something special with regards to this?
It was a meme from earlier. Don't worry about it.
Okay, gotcha. Well, hey, maybe, they've got nice interiors. Look, anyway, best of luck with all this. I don't want any bridges to burn any more than they already have, I guess. I would ask uh, that you reflect on the normativity thing because it's a blind spot that I've had for a while. I think, especially during the
And
Keep
I
It
also have
Private
something
discourse.
called normal theory, which is the 90% of the issues with political Twitch is if in fact well we wouldn't have as many problems. But it mostly has to do with people debating incest and using the N-word. Not anything to do with queerness. But then people used it to say I was being anti-queer and like assimilationist and look at the Christian, haha. But it was
Right,
just
right. No, 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 I get that. Oh, well, of course, I mean, if you're in Alabama, then the N-word and incest are quite normal, actually. So you have to check location first. With regards to the
normal theory
normalcy,
applies with what you just said, by the way. Okay.
or assimilationism or any stuff like that, I think it's kind of like future proofing, because all the people who were progressive 100 years ago today are reactionary. I mean, everyone, they're all anti-Semitic or they wouldn't have known what trans people are. And I feel like there has to be some kind of holistic ideological framework you can adopt to future proof yourself a little bit. And I think the best way you can do that is through a sort of a- opposition to hegemonic normality, where you try to detach yourself from any biases to the way things are and accept only the harm they do. I don't know if it's exclusively consequentialist. I don't know if you could have the deontological approach to that. But anyway, I appreciate
Those
you
are big
having me on.
words.
I I'm sorry the drama's been rough. I appreciate you having me on.
One last question.
And
One last quick.
right, right.
I'm going on JLP's thing. Advice?
Oh God, just have fun with it. Please don't get mad. Joke with him. He never takes it in stride. Like he always stutters a bit because he expects you to get mad or take it seriously. It's very funny.
Got it. Okay. Wonderful. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dylan. Take care. Okay.
Okay. Take care.
Bye.
Bye bye.